Thank you, Terry. That was really nice way to open us up. I wasn't expecting to have it be so thoughtful, and it reminds me that we're talking a lot more than just about the transfer of wealth. We're talking about the transfer of hope and opportunity and connection and possibility in all of our work. And the work that we do in giving and raising resources about creating all these opportunities for people to have mentors and to have scholarships and people be there for us. And it's important to take time to create those moments where we just stop for a minute and think about really how we're connected. This is off script, it's not in my notes, and our leadership and advocacy gets really nervous when I do this. I'm sorry, Jennifer. But we've been surveying folks that we work with, and one of the really interesting things that we found from the leaders that we survey is what has changed is more than resources, people are longing for connection in rural communities, more than anything. And I just want to say thank you to Terry again. The story that she's talking about is that I went to see Terry and she was giving me a spiel like I was the president of a foundation, and I kind of got the giggles and I said, hey Terry, I was homeless as a kid and I had to live in a shelter. And she just kind of started crying, and I was like, this is awesome. Thank you for what you do. You know, being able to stay in a shelter changed my life. And so I had planned on just saying, if you could look around the room, there's a lot going on in the world right now where it's really easy to feel disoriented and like we don't have a sense of direction because there's chaos. And day to day is like, what are we doing? What are we doing? And it's like, this is the moment to keep doing what we do and to drive through and go, we keep marching forward. This is our moment to keep bulldozing forward with bringing the good people together and creating that transfer of hope and opportunity for people. And this conference is about an incredible opportunity in front of Minnesotans and the United States with a massive transfer of wealth. But it's not just transactional, it's transformational. And when you start to feel lost in the moments of chaos and negativity, and there is negativity, look around. Every single person in this room is here for the right reasons, doing the good work. And they might not do it the way you would do it, but they're doing it. And that's really amazing. So we're going to talk about giving, we're going to talk about inspiration. We've got some really incredible leaders here, and I volunteered so that I could moderate and not answer the questions. And I also want to acknowledge that I'm a part of an incredible team, and if I could just take a minute to ask the Blandin Foundation team to stand up, I just want to acknowledge that team. Could you stand up, please? I'm going to get you. I saw how quick you popped up and sat down, Tracy.
I know.
I work with a really great team. Thank you. So we want to start by talking about jumping into your founder story and what inspired your founders to give, and then with Eric, what inspires your donors to give at a community foundation. And I think we could start at the end, Heather, with your foundation.
Yeah, thanks, Tuleah, and thank you all for the opportunity and invitation to be here today and to tell the story. So let me take us back about a century to Margaret Cargill. She was born in 1924. It was a different time. She became an adult during World War II, and it was an era where she experienced the expectations of her gender that were just common in those days. So it wasn't until later in her life that she even understood she had the agency to make choices about her wealth. And so One of the things that really inspires me about her story, and I caught just the end of one of the last sessions here, talking about relationships and the importance of trust when it comes to giving. It was later in Margaret's life. This was the late 1990s, so she was, well into her 70s and 80s. There were a couple of advisors who really did gained her trust and helped her understand that she had choices she could make about what she wanted to do with her wealth. And they asked her questions like, do you want to leave it to your family? Do you want to? Are there things you want to spend it on? Do you want to make a difference in the world? And I wasn't there at the time, but what I understand, it was a very quick. You mean I can do that? I can make a difference. I can leave it to people to do good work. So that's the avenue they explored, and they really helped her understand that she could leave some direction, which she did. She talked a lot about things that were important to her during her life. So she had volunteered during World War II with the Red Cross, so she understood the value of being able to help people in times of crisis. She lived in Southern California. She loved being outdoors. She understood the need to protect that space for generations beyond her. She lived a very simple and quiet life with some very dear friends. So she understood the value of relationships and how you can get a lot of work done with some really committed people. So she left instructions for both what she wanted to do, things around the environment, disaster relief. She fell in love with Native American culture. She was interested in preserving and allowing for the intergenerational transfer of that knowledge. But she also talked about how she wanted her giving to be done. She was not a person who liked attention. She didn't want us or her, people doing her work to be doing it for the attention. She talked about it's not about us, it's about the work getting done. She talked about working through relationships and long term. So some of that how is what she left us as well. And I think the way that we try to live into that now is she gave us enough direction to focus, but enough spaciousness to adapt. And I am really grateful for her foresight and also the people that sat with her and gained her trust during the end of her life when she was thinking about the legacy she wanted to leave, that she was able to do that.
You ready to hear about Archie?
Yeah.
Hi everybody, it's nice to be here, and I love to have the chance to talk about Archie Bush. Who's our Bush? We say regularly it's not beans, it's not beer, and it's not presidents. It's Archie Bush. And Archie was born and raised in Granite Falls, Minnesota. His family they were farmers, but he had hay fever, so he needed to find a different path for himself. So he moved to Duluth, started taking some business classes, and got a job as a bookkeeper at a little company called Minnesota Manufacturing and Mining, that of course became 3M. When he was hired as a bookkeeper, the guy who hired him was William McKnight, and he was hiring him as his replacement. He got promoted, and he hired Archie Bush in, and then they rose like that up the ladder until Bill McKnight was the CEO of 3M, and Archie Bush was the number 2 EVP and chair of the board, or the executive committee for 3M. And the McKnight is, of course, the McKnight that created the McKnight Foundation. Both Bush and McKnight foundations were created in 1953, and they had the same tax attorney. So it's not a coincidence that both of our foundations are exactly the same years old. Archie was really a generous guy. He was known for paying off the mortgage of the widow of a 3M employee, or supporting 3M employees to go to medical school and then forgiving their loans. And he did a lot of generous acts, and he was also really engaged civically. So like in World War II, he chaired the War Bond Committee for St. Paul. He was actually on the distribution committee of the St. Paul Foundation. He was really, really engaged. And the Bush Foundation motto, investing in great ideas and the people who power them, is also our strategy. And it really has roots in Archie and Archie's way of thinking about doing good and his way of being in the world. So the people part, one of the things we may be best known for is the Bush Fellowship Program. which was something that was created when Archie was still alive. He was president of the foundation, and he created it as something that he wished he could have had as an opportunity for himself. And we're still doing it today. In a lot of ways, it's really similar to what it was back then. It's different in some ways, like there are women who are fellows, for example. But in a lot of ways, it's the same, and it's based on a belief that great leaders know what they need, and it's maximum flexibility to give leaders the resources to develop themselves. And then the ideas part has roots in 3M and 3M innovation, and which is really the source of our money. So we try to think about all our work as a through line to Archie, and also really try to keep his generous spirit when we think about how we do our work, and remembering that everything we're doing is an extension of this animating act of generosity of Archie Bush to give all of his resources to the community.
So let's see if I get my version of this right. How do we keep our donors there as well as who started it? I can do the who started. Any paper in 1940s had a small amount of stock for a small company called St. Paul Boat and Marine. It grew a little bit into something called Travelers Insurance. But that small amount of stock, valued at about $5,000, she put aside with a challenge. When some other people will join me, then the community, and that will be the Community Foundation. 5 years later, they made their very first grant. 85 years later, that $5,000 has grown and given away more than $500,000. She had faith that people would join her. She believed in letting others decide where the money should go, but a requirement that it all be about community and community building. And that's really been a stunning legacy for Annie, members of her family still living who contribute to their foundation, and they start building that. And now the rest of our donors, I hope, want to be there for the same reason. We work very hard to let them know there's a place. We do events called Giving Together, in which we pull back the curtains with nonprofits and demonstrate, let the nonprofit leaders talk about what they do and how they do it, and never ask for money. And that's where we're invested, and we invite our donors to join us. We became, I think, the first non-Muslim community foundation to offer Sharia-compliant investment options. And so we became a major point of joining community among the Muslim community members in Minnesota. And we're pleased with that. We do work on community connectedness. We allow our donors to invest with us. 7 years ago, we offered 1.5% mortgage loans to families who needed a chance to build equity and build a credit rating. And we matched 1-for-1 that investment with every dollar from donor advised funds. 7 years later, those balloon mortgages gave 150 families their start on a home with 100% return, 100% of them fulfilling the contract requirements and moving into a mortgage with another company. So we let our donors be a part of the story of a community's success. We share with them that, and we give them a chance to join together and with us, with our history and legacy, and with their current colleagues today. That's how we keep them going. Did I get the answer? Thanks.
You pass. The next part of the question, you did great. Thank you. I think your foundation is fascinating. So before I started at the Blandin Foundation, I've been here for about 5 years. I spent about 20 years raising money and doing donor development and all different kinds. And so I thought all foundations are the same. And so when I started at the foundation, the view from inside philanthropy was really different than I expected. And so the next part of the question is, how do you manage and honor the tension of donor intent with the evolving needs of the world around us? And not just the intent, but the legality as a private foundation, what that intent is and what the law says.
Want me to start? It is a really good question, Tuleah, and I think especially in this moment, in the last weeks and months that we're walking through, we have a number of ways that we think about it. So we have programmatic strategies that help us guide our giving, and those are very much rooted in Margaret's intent. And so we try to ground in those broad areas, but we also have what we call it opportunity funds, where it's really meant to be as just responsive to what's happening in the moment. And we have a little bit looser guidance from Margaret around how to use those, but really we try to always be thinking through the lens of how she wanted to give. So one of the things that she named as important to her was, and this was her words from the time she was in, but serving the underserved. And so we try to think about who's not represented, who's not in the conversation already when we're thinking about those funds. In terms of the legalities and making sure we're doing the right work the right way, we have good advice. We have teams that help us think about that. I would say the space where it's harder, where we give is in the international space. There are a lot of rules and restrictions around that. But in the more domestic and Minnesota space, it really is just staying as close as we can to donor intent, but also paying attention to what the needs are and thinking about. I mentioned before we have good guidance, but we also have spaciousness. So we try to make sure our strategies are never too tightly scripted that we can't be responsive to what we're learning in the moment. And Tuleah, you mentioned your good team. That's where I have an amazing team too that's always thinking about that and thinking about what are we missing, what work needs to be done, and how can we do that within the kind of the container of the donor intent that we have from Margaret.
So for us, Archie left us a lot of flexibility. So it's not so hard from a legal standpoint to stay within his donor intent. He used pretty boilerplate language in the documents that set us up. And then also the things that he really cared about are very evergreen, like leadership, right? We always need leadership. What that looks like, what supports for leadership looks like can change over time, but it's really evergreen. So for us, a lot of donor intent is less about a legal issue and more spiritual. It's like, how are we making sure we're thinking and talking about Archie Bush in serious ways, and we do it in fun ways. Like at our last retreat, we had a Archie Bush donor intent chicken toss for good. Just started to bring fun into the spirit of Archie into all that we do. But I'll tell you, right after this, I'm going to be bolting out to go to our executive committee meeting of our board. And one of the things we'll talk about is what's going on in downtown St. Paul right now. And downtown St. Paul has the challenges that lots of downtowns around the country have, but also some unique ones because, there's a particular landlord who Eric and I worked together in one of the buildings. It was a real challenge, but is now deceased, and 25% of the commercial real estate's on the market at the same time. So, we're part of a number of people trying to figure out what do we do in downtown St. Paul, and I think, Archie really, really cared about St. Paul. He would definitely want us in there. I mean, he was even on the planning commission. Like, he would really be in on this. Then I also think, okay, he's a businessman. How bad a business investment could we make without Archie being ashamed of us? So really, as we're wrestling with something that, we'll make a good decision considering all of our values, everything that's needed in St. Paul, a lot of things, but wanting to make sure that we're doing things, frankly, that Archie would be proud of, and having that stewardship lens, which isn't just about stewarding the money, but it's stewarding the history and the spirit of the Bush Foundation over time.
And for us, donor intent does have a bit more legal involvement. We have 2,000 different sets of intention that we try to maintain some fidelity to, but at the core is the intent for a better, safer, stronger community. And that's in our founding documents. And so we do occasionally use variance power, and we will work to rewrite intent. There are those who wanted to leave money to telegraph systems that don't exist anymore, and we need to see that communities evolve. And sometimes well-being is different today than it used to be, and so we put in a screen for hate group funding. We don't allow our donors to go there. We don't believe that was ever their intent, and if they're alive and they argue with us, we'll have that conversation face to face. But mostly, so we do some screening for things that we don't want people to be ashamed of or we do want them if they really want to pursue it, and we're going to tell them no. But we believe that the fidelity to donor intent around the basic values of community well-being is something that we can pledge to. And in doing so, we can attract more donors with trust that they will have generations of impact that are responsive to the evolving needs of our community and our society.
Thank you. We want to acknowledge that there's a lot going on right now politically and in our economy, and it's creating challenges for all of us and folks in this room, both for private philanthropy and community foundations. And so we have been able to think about these questions before, so what do you think are the biggest risks for philanthropy in today's environment, and how do you think about navigating them?
You want me to go? Sure. I will go. You can take that question a lot of ways, because there are a lot of ways to think about risks in philanthropy. I think I'll talk a little bit about policy environment and sort of challenges for our field. And I know there was a breakout that MCN did, so some of you must have been in a conversation at least about some of the policy questions that are being asked right now and what that could mean for foundations and for the nonprofit sector more generally. And particularly those of you who are at community foundations have probably been watching in recent years questions about donor advised funds. I think there's a good chance we're going to have increased taxes this year. Like, there are a lot of things that are going on where there are always some policy questions. But there's some questions being asked right now that are way more fundamental to how we do our work. And I draw your attention to two things, both of which I would characterize as being around politicization of the nonprofit sector. So one area is how we define charitable purpose. There's a really broad definition of charitable purpose that the IRS manages toward. If we get into a new way of operating as a country, where each administration, as it comes in, could redefine charitable purpose, that could be really, really, really complicated for us and for lots of nonprofits in our community. So if nonprofits sort of fall in and out of favor based on whether the issues that they're working on are the priorities of the federal government, that could really be challenging in terms of like people losing their tax status and then maybe regaining their tax status and losing, like it could really be complicated. But it could also seriously impact the independence of the nonprofit sector. That if there's a sense that government can say now nonprofits need to be working on this and now nonprofits need to be working on that has big constitutional questions, but it also would undermine one of the most important functions of philanthropy to me, which is being able to put a lot of energy where government is not focusing always. And if we have our nonprofit sector just be an extension of government, I think we lose something that's really, really important and has been important for the entire history of our country. The second part of that I'd lift up is around the Johnson Amendment. So for those of you who don't know, the Johnson Amendment was passed in the 50s. The Johnson is actually LBJ, that's who it's talking about. But it was basically the rule saying that nonprofits can't engage in elections, right? They can't be partisan. And that's been raised a few times recently, but it's really on the table potentially this year. And that could really, really, really change what we do. Because just imagine the pressure on nonprofits to align their political stances with their donors' stances. I mean, it's really, really complicated to think about what our world could look like if we take down that wall that we've had in place to try to divide sort of the partisan part of our politics, endorsing candidates and that kind of partisan election-related activity, and the operations of nonprofits that are doing so many different kinds of things in our communities that are so important. So I think of both those things as really fundamental to how we work, and so I just encourage all of you in terms of managing it to stay in touch with MCN. They have great information, Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, of what's going on. Be involved in Minnesota Council of Foundations. I'm on the board of the National Council of Foundations and really encourage that if you can do it. But this is definitely a time for our sector, broadly defined, so it's all foundations, it's all nonprofits, to be alert to things that are happening and understand Like, even if it's something on the surface that you're like, oh, I don't care about that issue, or I do care about that issue, like, that's not the question that's important. It's what does it mean to fundamentally change the relationship between federal government and the work that we're all doing as nonprofits in our communities.
I'll maybe just build on that. That's so well said, Jen. One of the additional pieces that we think about is with the change in federal funding, especially in the landscape of that, just the infrastructure of the nonprofit sector could look very different. I think about, we do some funding in international aid, and with the dispersion of USAID funding, that will look very different. And so part of what we're thinking about is how to help our grantees just survive the moment. I mean, literally to be here next year to keep doing the work. So I think there are places where that's a really more of a real threat than in any time that I've been in philanthropy to date.
So I have little to add. I think that you've covered it. It's we're under great risk. Could be risk to our tax status. It could be risk to our spend down requirements. It could be risk to the deductibility. There are all of those. But the biggest risk for me is if we believe falsely that an executive order is a law. Stop following ideas that aren't written into law and keep doing what we're doing until we can have that confrontation over what is in fact required rather than frightened into us.
Where do you see the potential for positive movement right now through all of this? Why I'm the moderator.
Boy, I'm going to jump in so I don't have to answer with more depth. I think Harvard's month-to-month gains in giving have more than doubled since they have stood up and said, we want to represent this argument. And I think that unity and finding other strong voices who will say, we want to represent that argument, and getting some coherence, some logical and consistent alignment among independent sectors towards a shared goal of fighting one issue at a time is going to be energizing, and it's going to give us momentum going forward, and it will clarify the story of our value. And so I can only hope that we see more unity in spirit, whether it is in opposition to a bad idea or in favor of maintaining the best among us.
There you go. One thing I'd offer is that in a time where a lot is being dismantled and changed, there's opportunity to rethink then what things are going to look like going forward, right? So if we don't have a Department of Education anymore, what does it look like to care about education and do education policy work on a national level? Like there's opportunity for creativity and imagining and building back or building different other things. And I assume that in this room we have the entire range of, folks on political spectrum. And I'd be surprised if anyone in here was just like, nope, the federal government was exactly how I wish it was. I think all of us see opportunity for our federal government to work better in different ways. And so thinking about as so much is on the table, as so many big questions are being asked, and as so many things are being changed, there's opportunity to really have a vision for what it could look like to better serve everyone in the United States going forward.
I don't know that I have a lot additional to add other than just to maybe pull on a thread that I think both of you mentioned, which is this idea of going together. I think that there's wealth and power in the networks. I think in this room, the connections that we have and sort of the ability to share information, share knowledge about what's needed and when, and really to rely on one another as a fabric of philanthropy. I think that's one of the things that gives me a lot of hope, and I think we've all been leaning into in the last couple of months.
There's this question about how do we build trust with donors in the space of like the continuum of political and ideological perspectives during this time of polarization. And do you have thoughts or comments on that?
I do.
Go ahead.
I was two things. One is we need to trust our donors. That's as important as building trust in them. It's not a one-way street. I was in Warroad, Minnesota, where when you land your plane, your phone will suddenly say, "Welcome to Canada," on election day and a few days before. And Warroad has, with Marvin Windows, a need for more employees than they can get locally. And so every year they bring in at least a cadre of 50 people from Puerto Rico to settle in. And if you're there for a year, then they help you with housing and your family and other things, because they recognize that a full year in Minnesota is a very different experience than a full year in Puerto Rico. And that weekend, in the basement of a church, was a community program that had been put together that offered new visitors to Warroad, new residents, a chance. They would meet with a concierge. Everyone who was a volunteer that had been trained to be a concierge, help them with their fashion choices and other things. And you could come in, and for free you would receive advice on what kind of coat you need, your first ever pair of snow boots, what a snow shovel is for. These are things that are new to a lot of people. I watched as that community gave away great treasure. I watched a community that had some of the finest Puerto Rican restaurants in the middle of America grow. I watched as they've changed the aisles in their grocery stores to serve a very different community of desires. And I can tell you that the love and generosity in that community among its newest and oldest residents was stunning and noteworthy. And when my plan landed, I headed to a reservation. I felt it would be safer on election day to be there than anywhere else. And I turned on the news. I realized I had left one of the brightest red spots in all of Minnesota. But you see, it didn't feel red or blue or purple. There was no bruising. It felt that if you're close to people and you know them, it's hard to hate them. Hate is a factor we only gain the power to from distance, especially when it's generalized. And so being there taught me that I needed to trust our donors as much as I could ask them to trust me. And I think we need to build familiarity and share compassion. And while we might go about achieving our goals in very different ways, we're going to find that our hearts are united around people and values. And that is the lesson I'm trying to take from this. Close the distance between what you do and who you're talking to. And you'll dispel a lot of the distrust and fear.
I think that's all so smart, Eric. And when we think sometimes about like the forces of polarization in the country, and it can feel like these challenges are way bigger than us and they're buffeting our communities. And when I read the literature on polarization and here and around the world, like the best antidote to polarization is actually working together on something. And so Bush is an organization that funds primarily community-based work, and there are moments where you think like, oh, is that relevant? Like, is the real action at the national level? And then it's realizing, no, actually, the future of our country depends on what's happening in communities, right? So this is a room full of people who bring other people together to solve problems at the community level. And our ability to do that, and our ability to, as we're doing that, create communities that really make people feel like they belong and can work together, is actually, I think, some of the most powerful and important work you could be doing right now in our country in 2025.
Yes.
That was powerful. I don't think I have anything more to add to that other than I think going back to the relationship piece, that the thread that we've been pulling through here. I think when we think about, when we do our work at MACP, we always go back to our values, and I think the value of respect in showing up as we're doing work together, it couldn't be more relevant than it is now.
Oh, really thoughtful. And and everybody here is really thoughtful, and I want to make sure that we leave room for some questions too in in the audience, we have like just one more section of questions to get through and some time for questions and answers. So if you have some questions, we'll be able to ask those. So part of that question leads up to this transfer of wealth that we have happening, that's beginning now in this country and in Minnesota. We have billions of dollars beginning to transfer, and from your perspective, what do you think are the biggest challenges in keeping wealth local, and what role do you think that private foundations play in complementing the work of community foundations in capturing and reinvesting local wealth?
I can start us out. One way that we think about that is, so at MACP we talk about making a difference in local communities, but we aren't focused on just one local community. We have different areas where we look to make a difference. And that's where we look to partner with folks like Eric and his team, and the folks who are in the communities who really do know and understand what the needs are, how work gets done, whose voices are at the table, who needs to be. And so for us, for me, and the work that we do, it's looking for strong partnerships with folks who are in those communities and understand them.
Well, I'd say we love it when we get the chance to partner with community foundations, which we do get to in a variety of ways. We see Brian here from Initiative Foundation, and we are big supporters of the Initiators Fellowship, which was hatched at the Initiative Foundation, but now a number of MIFs are doing. We love that. I don't know if you guys all know the Initiators Fellowship, but some of the things that those leaders are doing just blow me away, like the self-service grocery store, and just amazing stuff. What we also, like we at Bush care about community level work, but we're not of a particular community. So when we think about our resources, we think about how are we investing in community driven work that could be spread to other communities. So where are people coming together and really thinking about a problem in a different way and develop some innovation or some new way of working that then we could help spread around to other communities. So right now, for example, we have major work spreading some innovations in resident-owned communities for manufactured housing, which is a really different way of thinking about manufactured housing as a way to actually build wealth. We have grants to support the spread of really innovative lending products. It's by Exodus Lending. That community organizations would actually make available to people who are in debt to help them get out of debt and start to build credit. So what we're always looking for is, where is there community energy, community ingenuity coming after a problem in a new way where we could partner in thinking about bringing that solution to life, but always with a mind of, if this works, would other people really value it too? And that's kind of our measure of where we get involved at the community level.
Oh, I don't like that look. So, community foundations are facing this problem, sometimes because of tax advantages to moving to, I apologize for those of you who are already there, God's Waiting Room, Naples, Florida. So there are tax incentives that are working against people giving and staying, but a lot of it, I heard Jack Driscoll talk about it earlier today when he said a tax attorney or an estate person who can talk to a group of people and give them a better set of knowledge about what they can do, awareness of the ways in which they can do it, help them develop the skills to make the transfer, and give light to and shine on examples of those who are already in the practice so you can see yourself joining a community. That awareness, knowledge, skills, practice continuum is an important one. We're seeing incredible transfer of wealth, but often from people who have not had the advantage of seeing how to put their wealth to work. And we have to give them a chance to see that. So in rural Minnesota, the greatest transfer of wealth is happening with non-cash assets. And many people don't know how to make those transfers. Farm equipment can depreciate as quickly as 10 years. A used John Deere is worth $125,000 when it's 10 years old, but if you're taking the full depreciation, you can't sell it without tax penalty. You can, however, assign it to your community foundation. They can sell it, and you can become a significant donor in your community with a large donor-advised funds, tax deductions, and not tax penalties. That's a stunning story of which too few people are aware. So we're working with people to help them understand how to convert non-cash assets. That's the word I'm not supposed to use. My staff, we won't tell Jeremy I used it. Complex assets is what the accountants call it. But it's not that complex. All right? But that transfer of wealth is not cash in hand. It's property, it's lake houses, it's farm equipment. It's why our farmers have a new Ford F-350 every 5 years, because they've depreciated it and they'd rather take the deduction than pay the taxes to the government. I stand with them on that, but they could donate that 350 and get a bigger deduction and open a donor advised fund. We have to tell that story and help people understand how to do that as a part of their transfer of wealth, have them be connected to others in community who do it, and celebrate them with joy for this innovative way of giving.
So are you saying the technical knowledge is missing? Like that's a challenge and a risk?
Yes.
And an opportunity? And like kind of the capacity to get there is this space?
Mm-hmm. Most people don't voluntarily go to lawyers. I apologize to you. My wife's an attorney. All right. So the idea that you're going to learn something and ask questions that you don't know could be a question. You can't imagine you could donate. So yes, the awareness and the knowledge needs to be paired with the skills and capacity so that we can see a change in practice.
And that, seems ironic when we know that 5 to 7 or 9% of philanthropy is going to rural. So how do we get the capacity to get the technical knowledge to capture the moment and the opportunity that we're in? So do you have a recommendation? That wasn't in a question.
I think we need to look at our community and understand what's missing in their knowledge base. How do we ask the right question, and how do we help people understand that there are questions they should be asking and don't know to ask? I don't have I have a bad example of it. So, but if you'll bear with me, I'm in graduate school, and I get invited to my first faculty cocktail party. I borrow the student tie and go to the party, and I'm standing there with my cocktail not knowing what the hell to do. People are talking. And, oh God, I'm on the side of, they're talking about art, Monet, Manet, two different people. Who knew? And now I grew up, you should know, between Oklahoma and Rhode Island, so I know a bit about seafood, and I know a lot about cow tipping. You don't actually tip cows, they don't go over, they just get irked. And so suddenly, I'm feeling so uncomfortable, I don't know what's going on. But they turn to me and they ask about Pollock. I knew that, right? A little bland for my taste, I said, but otherwise fine. Yes, it was 5 years before I knew they were talking about Jackson Pollock, but I still sounded pithy. The point is, when you move from one space to another, people assume that you share foundational knowledge with them in their community, in that practice, in that area. There is a set of, no pun intended, foundational knowledge, the kind of knowledge we build upon for wealth management that's also in foundations that we're not sharing. People don't know what questions to ask, and they are answering with Pollock and meaning fish, not art. So we need to help them understand. We need to understand where we're missing pieces in that foundation and where they're missing pieces in that foundation, and start supplying them with that knowledge base. It's truly awareness and knowledge that we're lacking before there's any motivation to develop the skills to practice philanthropy. And if I could ask large foundations, maybe even one in the chair I'm sitting in, to step up, it's going to be in helping communities who have never been asked to think about their assets in this way, to know there's a lot more they can do with them than they realize. And to share that and be bold about it and repeat it, because the first time it doesn't seem like it could possibly be true. that I could become the largest philanthropist by getting that piece of equipment off my lawn that my partner's been telling me I need to move all along anyway. So,
I think we should acknowledge that Heather's a lawyer. And she,
I thought I was going to get away without doing that.
She's a lovely person and a good friend.
Don't hold it against me.
Yeah, my wife's a lawyer. I didn't stand up when the divorce question was asked. She managed to survive me nevertheless.
So what do you think, like, keeps us from having that actual, like, the technical conversation and planning on mapping that out? I mean, like, a genuine question. Because we think about it all the time at our foundation, like, how would we really solve this problem? Or opportunity? I mean, how would we...
I'll show up when you convene.
Okay. But, I mean, have you actually thought about, like, what prohibits us from really putting this, like, the rubber hits the road, for lack of a better analogy?
I think we're all caught up with doing what we've been doing and fighting what we see as the current headwinds to think about something even more creative and expansive when we need to think about growth more than ever before.
Thank you. Thanks. So we have talked about a lot of different ways to talk about our work, and I do want to leave time for some questions. And we've talked about legacy, we've talked about wealth transfer, the challenges going on, what's in front of us. I know that we have some folks that can help with fielding questions for us. So we'll just kind
Raise
of
your
see
hands.
if you have questions.
Hi, my name is Bashir. I am with the Center for African Americans and Youth Organization, an agency that serves immigrant service and low-income communities in Minnesota and in Oregon. I want to say thank you for the opportunity, thank you for the wisdom that you've shared with us. I wanted to take this opportunity to invite all of us in the room, the foundations, whether big or small, to be truly intentional about the words that we use, because those words shape not only what we think, but also how we act. I'm particularly talking about words like underserved communities, to words like disinvested communities. As we talk about transfer of wealth, as we talk about investment, as we talk about opportunity, let's talk about disinvestments that has happened historically, and use terms like that to truly reflect the context of what we're dealing with in 2025. Because that truly tells us the legacies of exclusion, of extraction versus extractions. So if we were to truly to be equitable, to truly think about equity, let's think of the language that we use on a daily basis. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Steve Peterson, Board Chair of Community Giving. I think of these times, and I think of all parts of Minnesota, in fact the country, that when we face these strong headwinds, we have to collaborate more. And so I'm wondering, you both all come from very strong historical organizations, and I'm wondering how you think you could collaborate better with each other to address some of these issues, and how we could collaborate with you.
Tuleah, that question was to you.
I love the question, and I definitely think about it. I'm coming into this work and thinking about what change can I affect with the time that I have here, and what will happen in the arc of time that my career will be here. What is the legal framework that I can work with? So the point of bringing me up, like, how is private philanthropy different, is really important. And like, I did not know that before I started. And so we have a limitation at the Blandin Foundation that's very different than the Bush Foundation. A lot of flexibility at the Bush Foundation, very limited at the Blandin Foundation. And most people don't know that. And because I've been a grant seeker and a grant manager and done the work in community, I know that nobody has time to know that. And I know what I thought about funders when I was on the other side of the cash register, you know, so that makes it a little bit of a tricky situation to be in, where I have to think through all the different dynamics of perspective and answering your question. So I would say, I want to figure out what is the opportunity, who can do what, and then how do we map that out? And I think this conversation about the transfer of wealth is a huge opportunity. And your point about tax incentives, that's a big deal here. There are other states that have done that. They have identified how to create tax incentives for wealth transfer. I think Kathy Allen, you're here, I see you. Other states have created tax incentives that incentivize people to leave resources in community. That's a real win for rural communities to advance. We could all get on the same page about that, and our home communities would have more resources. We can do that together, and that's not gonna bend what our donor intent says or what IRS rules are gonna maybe get me in trouble for at the time when my board of trustees decides whether or not I get to stay. I mean, you know, there's like that element. So what are the kind of things that are that continuous through line that come? I'm also really interested in some of the work that MCF is doing about how do we create certain types of professional development, consistent training opportunities for people. So when Dr. Jolly was talking about what are these types of training opportunities that are the technical pieces, what do rural development specialists need to know in the next 20 years about farm equipment? Because I certainly don't know it. And I'll tell you that if somebody shows up in Aiken County in a suit, in a Lincoln and says, I'm gonna take your tractor, that's not happening, right? Like, it's just not. My grandpa is gonna drive you right out of his mile-long driveway. Like, so we need to have some cultural context about how we're training people with the right type of training. Those two things alone over the next 10 years will fundamentally shift what that 5 or 7% looks like in Minnesota. All we need to do is identify some really key baselines we want to lift that we can mobilize Minnesotan, like transfer wealth.
That's wonderful. And we've had great success in Minnesota with something called Greater MSP and the Itasca Partnership. I believe there's an opportunity for a similar structure to focus on bringing together the philanthropic resources of this state.
I'll just add that I think we're a remarkably collaborative philanthropic community in Minnesota. Like, talking to peers around the country, they kind of can't believe how often we work together. And actually the four of us are like, we're on calls together. How often is it?
At least once a month, often once a week.
To understand what the others are doing and see where can we collaborate. And quite often those collaborations the money ends up going to Eric at St. Paul Foundation, which is one of the most amazing, useful contributions of community foundations, is being able to play that sort of backbone role when we do get together and collaborate. But I also want to call out MCF, which you did already, Tuleah, but I've been so appreciative of MCF's willingness the last 5 years, I think, more and more, to step in and be the group that will gather funds to be able to work together, sometimes even help doing the grant making. And, you know, MCF is in a leadership transition right now, and I have tried to be a vocal voice and say, let's get somebody who's still excited about doing that, because I feel like their ability to help us be better than the sum of our parts, they've shown it in ways that have been really powerful, and I think there's even more we can do together.
I'll just do a quick +1 for the Minnesota Council on Foundations. There's the pooled funds, which has been incredibly helpful, and I think also the ability to offer kind of technical assistance, so trainings and sessions that the sector can, you don't have to hire your own lawyer to learn about some of the things that are relevant right now. So I think some of those are maybe a little bit less visible, but I think no less important.
think I see. Whoop.
He told me it takes just 2 seconds for that.
We have one more
We
question.
have one more question.
Yeah, one more question.
Hi, I'm a volunteer, and I'm not on a board or anything like that. And I'm 71 years old, and they like me as a volunteer because I go out and ask for money. When they see me coming through the door, they hang on to their wallets, and they hide their checkbook. But that's saying that. One of the challenges that I have in going out and asking for money, because I truly believe healthy nonprofits make healthy communities. Healthy nonprofits make healthy communities. Whenever you see healthy nonprofits in a community, the community's healthy. And I believe that to my core. That's why I'm still involved. And one of the things I'm involved with is DECA for that local high school. And one thing that I would encourage each of you to do is get involved with the youth. We got some really great kids coming up. And if you could just see their partnership with the hospitals and with the schools and with the businesses and whatnot, and working with those young kids and those businesses and making plans on how to improve their business, and then asking those kids what they want to do, and they want to become doctors, and they want to become business people, and they want to become teachers, and their dreams are bigger than what mine were. But as a volunteer, I go out and I ask for money, and one of the things that I need to make sure I do better is asking for money for organizations such as yours. But there's a clause in there that says, our grants are by invite only. As a volunteer, tell me how to get by that. As a volunteer, tell me what I can do to, not only for your organization, I don't want to put you on the spot, but for others, because it is a challenge. It is a challenge. You want rural America to grow. You want rural America to succeed. And we have a lot of challenges, no question about it, but there's a lot of us that want to have healthy nonprofits for healthy communities. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
I want to be so careful about how I answer this because our staff is here right now. I want to be really careful about how I answer that because there's so much behind what you said. And I also want to say that our questions we've asked, this could have been a week-long conference. There's so much behind what's going on in rural communities right now that it would take an entire week for us to unpack what's going on with rural philanthropy, with the need to talk about the historical disinvestment, the exploitation, what's going on with nonprofits, what's going on with scarcity, what's going on with our rural hunger games, what's going on with the attritional economic deterioration, what manufacturing did to us. We need a much bigger conversation to get to why foundations are in a situation where they may need to choose to limit invite-only grants because of how small their bucket of money is. It is so complicated what only 5% does. And the tension around your question between the ethical dilemma that you're in, that is the very valid question, and it's the tip of the iceberg behind it so many things that when we unpack it, we really wrestle what would it take to actually solve this problem instead of simply admiring the problem over and over and over again. And it's why we really want to support conferences like this and dig in and ask questions and really listen to people and think, what is the true technical skill set that we need? What is the actual capacity that it would take? Who are the people that would do it? What is the plan that it looks like to tackle these questions? Because I bet if the amount of resources those foundations had was larger, they wouldn't be choosing that. I bet they would have an open RFP. At the end of the day, they would. And I bet they don't want to compete with the nonprofit organizations in their community. Scarcity does horrible things to our communities. And we need to figure out how to get beyond the scarcity and start working together, in particular with our children, who are going to be the ones who are leading forward and letting us age with dignity in our communities. You know, staying home and keeping our wealth and our talents like local in that. And I just really appreciate your volunteering and asking those hard questions here openly, as well as pointing out like disinvestment and how did it come to be and where did the wealth we're sitting on come from and how are we wrestling those questions to the ground. We didn't get into that, and we do talk about that and we do address that, and I want you to know we do that. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody in this room. I hope that we can see each other in this room and leave here knowing we're all doing the work, and we have to keep doing it.